In August 2021, shares of Carvana, the company famous for those towering sci-fi car vending machines, hit an all-time high of $370 per share. It was the fastest company to ever break into the Fortune 500. They promised to revolutionize the used car industry, turning the miserable, sweaty experience of a dealership into a shop-from-your-sofa dream. They were selling millions of cars, disrupting a century-old industry, and commanded a market cap of over $60 billion. Then, just a few years later, it crashed 98% and almost went bankrupt. But now, it's back again. What's going on? This is the story of how a vending machine gimmick fooled Wall Street, collapsed, and then allegedly reinvented itself through one of the most sophisticated financial grifts of the modern age. First off, what even is Carvana, and why this gigantic car vending machine? You see, buying a used car sucks. It's shady, it takes ages, and you always feel like you're getting ripped off. Founded in 2012 by Ernie Garcia III, Carvana's pitch was simple: the Amazon of cars. You buy online, get 360-degree tours, and the car shows up at your door. Or, for the theatrical buyers, you could go to one of their massive glass towers. You insert a giant coin, and the automated machinery pulls your car down to you. It was a marketing masterpiece. As co-founder Ryan Keaton admitted, the vending machine was essentially a gimmick designed to stick in people's minds as they drove down the highway. And it worked. Revenue exploded from $370 million in 2016 to nearly $4 billion by 2019. But behind the shiny glass was a shadowy origin. Carvana wasn't a scrappy startup built in a Silicon Valley garage. It was spun out of Drive Time, a massive used car chain owned by the CEO's father, Ernest Garcia II. You see, Garcia II isn't your average businessman. In 1990, he pled guilty to bank fraud related to the Lincoln Savings and Loan collapse, one of the biggest financial scandals of the 90s. He is a convicted felon. Yet, he remained the largest shareholder of Carvana, working in tandem with his son. This father-son dynamic would become the ticking time bomb in Carvana's machinery. For years, Carvana grew fast but lost money on every car they sold. They were burning cash to acquire customers. But in 2020, the world stopped.
Now to growing concerns about the deadly coronavirus.
A case of coronavirus is the
We
first.
begin with the coronavirus emergency tonight.
The pandemic was a disaster for the global economy, but it was the golden ticket for Carvana. 3 specific economic miracles happened at once to fuel this fire. First, the supply chains broke. New cars stopped being made, so the price of used cars skyrocketed. Carvana's massive inventory sitting in parking lots suddenly became gold dust. They had bought cars cheap, and now, without doing anything, those assets were worth a fortune. Second, consumer behavior shifted overnight. People were stuck at home with stimulus checks, afraid to visit physical dealerships. Touchless delivery went from a nice perk to a safety necessity. Carvana's digital-first model was perfectly positioned to capture this panic buying. And third, and most importantly, the Federal Reserve cut interest rates to near zero. This is crucial because Carvana isn't just a car seller, they are effectively a bank. Carvana issues loans to customers, often those with bad credit who can't get financing elsewhere. They then bundle those risky loans together and sell them to investors on Wall Street. When interest rates are near zero, investors are desperate for any kind of yield. This allowed Carvana to lend money cheaply and sell the debt for a premium. Revenue exploded from $5.5 billion in 2020 to $12.8 billion just 1 year later. The stock hit $370. The Garcias became multi-billionaires, and they were the kings of the pandemic economy. But economic bubbles always burst. In 2022, the music stopped. The Federal Reserve began aggressively raising interest rates to fight inflation, hiking them as high as 5.25%. Suddenly, the entire machine reversed. Financing a car became expensive, so demand dried up. Used car prices plummeted as supply chains normalized. Carvana was left holding thousands of cars they had bought at peak pandemic prices, which were now worth less than what they paid. They were underwater on their own inventory. But instead of pulling back, Carvana made a fatal error. They thought the party would last forever. In the middle of this downturn, they spent $2.2 billion in cash to acquire Odessa, a wholesale auction network. They burned their cash reserves right when they needed them most. Even worse, they financed this deal with high-interest debt, drowning the company further. Simultaneously, their operations fell apart. In their rush for growth at all costs, they stopped doing the paperwork. Customers were buying cars but waiting months, sometimes a year, for their registration. Just imagine buying a car and not being able to drive it legally because the dealer never sent the title. Some customers were pulled over and even arrested because they were driving with expired or fake temporary tags issued by Carvana. States like Illinois and Michigan eventually suspended Carvana's license to operate. By December 2022, the stock had fallen 98% to just $4. The company had $9 billion in debt and was burning cash every single day. This should have been the end, but then something strange happened. In July 2023, facing a wall of debt, they struck a massive deal with Apollo Global Management and other creditors to restructure over $1 billion in debt. This gave them breathing room. They slashed costs, fired thousands of employees, and stopped focusing on growth. And on paper, it worked. In 2023 and 2024, they reported record profits. They claimed to have cracked the code, making over $3,000 in gross profit per car, numbers that traditional dealerships can only dream of. Investors, desperate for a comeback story, bought it hook, line, and sinker. The stock rallied 2,000%, putting the Garcias back on top. But deep divers and forensic accountants started noticing that the math didn't add up. On January 25th, 2025, Hindenburg Research released a report that shattered the illusion. They alleged that Carvana's turnaround was built on accounting tricks and insider self-dealing. Allegation 1 was fake profit margins. Hindenburg says Carvana makes its profits look bigger than they really are. They claim Carvana moves normal costs, like shipping and getting cars ready to sell, out of the cost of the car and into a general expense category. By doing this, Carvana's profit per car looks about 35% higher than it should be. The business appears more efficient, but in reality, the costs are just being shifted around on paper. And allegation 2 was the secret loans. The report also claims Carvana sold about $800 million in risky loans to a company secretly connected to Ernest Garcia II. Instead of selling these loans to an independent bank, they were basically selling bad debt to themselves. This made their financial results look stronger than they really were, without telling investors. It created a fake sense of demand for their loans. But the timing of stock sales is what really raises red flags. This is where the situation starts to look less like normal business decisions and more like something intentionally misleading. Back in 2021, before the crash, Ernest Garcia II sold $3.6 billion of his stock. He cashed out at the absolute top. Then, in 2023, right before the company announced their best quarter ever, the son, CEO Ernie Garcia III, bought shares at the bottom. As the stock rallied again in 2024, the father sold another $1.4 billion. While retail investors lost their savings during the 98% crash, the Garcia family extracted billions of dollars from the company. Hindenburg Research concluded their report by saying, "We think the Garcias will leave shareholders with nothing." The story of Carvana isn't just about used cars. It's about the modern stock market. It's a company that turned a low-margin, gritty business into a high-flying tech stock using cheap money, aggressive accounting, and a bright, shiny gimmick. Is Carvana a legitimate turnaround story, or is it, as the allegations suggest, a father-son grift designed to enrich the founders while leaving investors holding the bag? Regulators are now circling, and law firms are opening investigations. But one thing is certain, if you see a giant vending machine on the side of the road, remember that the machinery inside might be much more complicated and dangerous than it looks. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more deep dives into the economics of businesses, make sure to subscribe. It really helps the channel grow.